Hi, I'm Scott Beaulier, host of EconVersations and director of the Manuel Johnson Center for Political Economy here at Troy University. Thank you for tuning in to tonight's program. Tonight on our show, we're going to do something a little bit differently. I'm going to be in the hot seat taking questions about a research topic that I'm very interested in, passionate about, and have a lot of personal stake in because it affects me and probably affects a lot of our viewers, Troy University professors, state representatives, state workers who may be tuning into this broadcast. Recent research that I finished up looks at the state of public pensions across the United States and tries to determine which programs have had some success, which programs are struggling, and what can be done in the way of reforming, especially since the 2008 financial crisis. So again, I'll jump into the hot seat here, and with us tonight is Dr. Dan Sutter from the Johnson Center for Political Economy. He's the Charles Koch Professor of Economics and someone who's going to ask me all of the tough questions about this topic. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Well, glad to be here.
Great.
Scott, you've completed this study on public pensions across the country. What states are in the worst shape?
There are a few that are pretty bad. Alabama's not doing well, but some of the really bad ones are Illinois. I would say Illinois is the worst, has the worst public pension program right now in the country. Kentucky hasn't been doing well at all either. Louisiana, for different reasons, partially it's been driven there by corruption, hasn't been doing well, and I'd say New Jersey as well are four of the worst ones.
Now, in your paper, you're discussing two different types of pension models that the different states employ. So I was wondering if you could explain to us the difference between these defined benefit and defined contribution programs. Sure. And what kind of programs are the ones that are in trouble?
Sure. So the big distinction is defined benefit versus defined contribution. And defined benefit is where you're guaranteed a certain amount of pay it's a formula-based model. You're guaranteed a certain amount of benefits based on years of service, your salary when you retired, and other factors, the solvency of the pension plan too. So for example, in Alabama, it's our highest 3 years of salary. You take the average of those highest 3 years, and then you use a formula based on number of years that you've served. So if you're here 25 years, which is an important cutoff point, if you're here 25 years, you retire at 50% of your highest 3 years salary, the average there. So let's say someone averages in their final 3 years $100,000. They put in 25 years of service. They're guaranteed for the rest of their lives $50,000 per year in benefits that get paid out, and they get paid out monthly, of course. Defined contribution involves an employer or a state government basically saying, we're going to contribute this percentage of your pay to a program that you control as the individual. So they'd probably put it in like a TIAA CREF or a Vanguard account, and they say, we're going to give you 10% or 8% of every dollar that you make, and all of that money is going to go straight into your own individualized retirement account, over which you have to make decisions. The defined benefit, we are required to contribute. Right now it's rising to 7.5%. I think it's 7.25, and then it'll be 7.5 next year. And that requirement is just mandatory. You can't opt out of it. You can't say, I'd rather have that money go to my own account. It goes into the retirement system of Alabama, who then takes the money and invests it for us. And the hope is that all of those investments will bear nice returns and pay pensioners down the road. So the big difference is who controls it, you or this larger agency.
Now, when you talk about some of the states that have that are currently in trouble with their pensions, how can you measure whether a state pension program is doing well or doing poorly?
There's a measure that is widely accepted by people who are in favor of reform, people who want to just stick with what we have, and it's funding ratios. That's kind of the gold standard at determining how well a pension program is doing. And a funding ratio of 1 or 100% would mean that a pension is fully funded. All of the future liabilities to pensioners could be offset right at this moment with the assets that are in that investment pool. If you're below 1, that means that your future liabilities are greater than the assets that you've collected from your current employees. If you're above 1, it means that you're actually collecting more than you will have to pay out. The ones that are doing really poorly, like Illinois, are down to funding ratios of 50% or just under 50%. Kentucky is a really interesting case. They were up as high as 120% in terms of their funding ratio, and it's just a straight line down. They now are around, I think, 60 or 70% funding ratio. So these things change a lot over time. And when you become underfunded significantly, like Illinois, like Kentucky, like Alabama, we're only at about 75, 78% funding ratio, you have to shore that up. And shoring it up usually means cuts in benefits or increases in taxes.
Now, you show that in Alabama and some of these other states like Kentucky used to be in a better shape with their funding ratio. How much of a role has the financial crisis of 2008 played in the deteriorating situation of these pension funds?
It's played some role. Anytime you have a year where the S&P 500 goes down over 40%, that's going to affect rates of return in these pension systems as well. It would have hammered someone in an individual account too. If you have individual investments in another mutual fund, you got killed after the 2008 financial crisis. But I think if you look at it and look at charts over time, over the last 10 years or so, the story is just a steady incremental decline. Their funding ratios, for the ones that we've been saying are struggling, have been dipping steadily, and it's independent of the 08 financial crisis. The financial crisis didn't help, but the ratios decline have a lot more to do with politics and with just demographics. The fact that more and more people are retiring and living really long, and you have less and less people coming into these state systems. States are broke. They can't hire the same number of people that they did in the past. And what supports a defined benefit system is young, new employees and program growth. If states are contracting, it makes it really tough to hold those ratios up.
Well, you also mentioned that some states like Kentucky have had ratios above 1 or 100 in the past, but they tend not to persist for very long. Why is that?
So what happens when programs look good? Alabama's looked great back in 2000, 2001. We were above 1 for our funding ratio, which again means that our assets, the total amount of our assets, are greater than our liabilities. That's what you want, essentially, to at least promise solvency. But again and again, what these public pensions do when they're in good financial shape is they hand out extra benefits or they expand coverage. So in the case of Kentucky, they basically expanded the Kentucky retirement system to include a bunch of people who maybe didn't belong, people in kind of mixed parastatal types of organizations, and organizations that aren't traditionally thought of as state jobs. So jobs that are loosely connected to the state. Those employees now became eligible for benefits. So what Kentucky did is they said, we're in good shape, we're going to expand like crazy. And all of that expansion has really cut into their funding ratio. New Jersey was in great financial shape in 2000, 2001. And what politicians did there was they gave a one-time handout to all future retirees that promised a 9% increase in their benefits. So immediately what happens to your funding ratio is it dips. And they played politics. It was very popular, but it was very costly to future employees of the state of New Jersey. Alabama did something similar. The pension ratios looked good in our state, and they went down the road of providing drop benefits to a lot of members. And drop is this, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it essentially was trying to keep Alabama retirees in the state of Alabama. So if you put in your 25 years of experience and got basically fully vested in Alabama, you could continue to accrue retirement benefits and stay on your job longer. You can make your full salary plus be guaranteed 50% of that salary into your retirement account. So it was a huge extra chunk of money for the retirees who stuck around, but it compromised our program's overall value.
Well, I mean, it's the Christmas season, so politicians, I think everybody likes to play Santa Claus.
Absolutely. And when you see a resource that is showing or indicating that it's fully funded, your immediate incentive is to just give some of that away. Yeah.
No, in your paper you talk about Michigan, ironically, given Michigan's overall poor fiscal situation, actually provides a good example for states that might want to undertake some kind of fundamental reform.
Yeah, Michigan's really interesting. You're right. It's a state that's curious, high unemployment, one of the few states besides Louisiana where people are actually leaving the state in droves. They have a declining population. But in this one area, they're kind of a model and a path breaker. They were one of the first to do this. They shifted their pension system from defined benefit to defined contribution, beginning in the year 1997. And you can say, well, it was a Republican governor who had some foresight, John Engler, who really kind of spearheaded and led that. But whatever the reason was, it's saved Michigan about $4 billion over the last 14 years. And I can't imagine, given Michigan's budgetary scenario, what it would have required to find an extra $4 billion, more taxes and more soaking of the few businesses who are there. So it was a very important move. And if you look at satisfaction, people in Michigan are actually pretty happy with this idea that they own their own retirement account. The big thing that Michigan got by shifting to defined contribution was they know exactly how much they have to pay each year in the way of contributions. What you get with defined benefit are these wild swings, and wild swings in policies that affect the retirees and affect the administrators trying to come up with the revenue for the program.
How much does a defined contribution plan typically pay employees versus how much are we paying in Alabama? So
it's a really good question, because I don't think many people are aware of this. You and I might look at our checks and say, oh, we're paying 7.25%, and that's all that's going into the retirement system of Alabama. But the truth be told, on the other side of the equation, in our case it's Troy University, on the other side the employer's paying a big chunk too. I'm pretty sure it's changed recently in Alabama, but I'm pretty sure it's 10 or 12%. So if you look at the total amount being paid into the retirement system of Alabama on every dollar that you will earn, it's around 18% for Alabama. Michigan's only paying, they have a matching scenario, but it's essentially 10% on every dollar earned in the state of Michigan. 10% versus 18%, that's significant taxpayer savings. Alabama's not terrible in this area. There are some states that are far, far worse. Louisiana is right near the top. Louisiana, the combined employee and employer contributions is over 30%. Imagine what you could do with 30% on every dollar earned if it was just put into a fund that you controlled, as opposed to these funds that the money goes into, and then in many cases it's paid right back out for healthcare, it's paid right back out to retirees, and the programs are essentially not solvent fundamentally.
So the much higher tax rates or payment rates, and they're still not fiscally sound.
They're not, and a lot of it has to do with the healthcare costs. So one thing that you get with the public pensions in many of these states is a promise to bridge the gap between when you retire and when Medicare kicks in. At my previous job, I was at a private university. There was no guarantee. There was no healthcare benefit beyond my retirement. So there was no bridge. I would have had to find insurance and just go into the market to get me to Medicare. What we're doing for this group of retirees who in many cases can retire at 55 or 58 is bridging it by providing really, really good health care, okay? And that health care is extremely expensive and a very costly add-on that explains the big difference in 10% versus 18%.
Now, one criticism that people raise of the defined contributions plans is that then the individual worker is going to be at risk. They could face risks with market fluctuations, whereas with the defined contribution plan, you have the formulas, and the formulas don't change very much. So individuals face more risk, especially if they make irresponsible or poor decisions in terms of investing their own funds.
Right.
What reform efforts found in this regard?
Well, I would say two things. First, we're still at risk, even in a defined benefit program. What is being promised to us right now, I'm confident will not be what we actually get if we stick around 25 years or 10 years or whatever it may be. It's going to be pennies on the dollar in terms of actual payout. And that's been the story of RSA and a lot of these other programs. Employees are asked to kick in more and more and more. Back farther in time, employees were kicking in a lot less to the retirement system of Alabama, and they were getting the same benefits. You and I are being asked to kick in more as our taxpayers, and it's even less in the way of benefits. Healthcare premiums have been forced up. The equation has been changed a little bit, to modify how much we get in benefits. Drop has been dropped. So the benefits promised don't remain constant even in these defined benefit programs. So people think they're secure, they're safe. But if you do the math, you're actually not doing great. It's somewhat of a transfer program. Money that goes in now goes to retirees who are there already. What you're going to get is pennies on the dollar later on. So first point is defined benefit isn't risk-free. There are significant risks to it. And my feeling is that we're going to continue to be asked to pay more for less. Defined contribution, though, indeed has this risk element to it. You have these individuals who can put money into their retirement accounts and then just go pick a bad stock. They could put all their money into Enron and be left with nothing because Enron went bankrupt. They could put all their money into bonds, and that will be an unsatisfactory rate of return to get them to old age. If you just put all your money into bonds, you're probably going to come up short, and then what? This can be dealt with in a couple of ways. One, you can tie the individual's choice a little bit down. You can constrain their choice a little bit so that they can't pick individual stocks, or they can only put a certain amount into any one stock. You can offer them a basket that's the default option. And that basket could be, some kind of well-managed fund that says, we're looking out for your retirement in the year 2030. And these programs have actually been implemented in the private sector, and even in some of the states like Michigan. Your choices are limited because of this issue of individuals picking investments.
Turning to Alabama, what would you recommend there then for the state of Alabama and the RSA program?
I would love to see far more radical reform. It doesn't seem like it's on the table. Alabama's not going to go the route of Michigan anytime real soon, although some states are. The state of Utah recently moved to convert from defined benefit to defined contribution. So when people get fed up enough with having to pay high taxes and they look at these programs and say it's never going to end, Alabama's unfunded liability has been creeping up from hundreds of millions to $1 billion. Each year, these are unfunded liabilities that they have to deal with again the next year. And we're asked to pay more, they have to cut benefits, all the things we've been talking about. So if people get fed up enough, there'll be a call for significant and real reform. I'd love to see Alabama go the way of Michigan, and just allow individuals choice over how their retirement is invested, get it out of the hands of this bureaucracy. That probably won't happen, so we're left looking at what can retirement system of Alabama do around the edges. And one thing I'd love to see is have these investors get out of the business of supporting Alabama industry. It's terrible what they're doing with about 10% of our money, trying to take our funds and focus them on Alabama initiatives, the Robert Trent Jones Golf Course, the Mercedes plant out near Tuscaloosa, all of these Marriott hotels that we can stay at for real cheap. They're not the highest returning investments, but they look really good because they raise Alabama's profile a little bit. They're not delivering the highest returns they can for us when they're doing that, though.
Well, but some people would say that those types of investments do end up benefiting the state in ways, to bring the Mercedes plant here and the golf courses. And so what would you say to people who would be saying, well, Alabama as a state would be losing out on this opportunity to invest, to help out Alabama businesses in a way that could end up benefiting the whole state?
Yeah. My feeling is that this isn't something that a pension plan should be doing, trying to figure out how to get Alabama to develop. I think that Alabama development is something that is much more determined by the business environment. What are we doing to encourage businesses to come through our taxes? What are we doing on the regulatory front to encourage businesses to come? Do we have a fairly transparent legal process? Is it easy to start a business up? Those are the things that'll get Mercedes to come. If we're comparatively attractive in those areas, what are our labor costs? Do we have right to work laws? You know, things like that are far more important than handouts that the retirement system of Alabama is providing to these companies for coming, whether it's the space or whether it's the land, or perhaps even some kind of subsidy offsetting some of the cost. That's not something that you want state-led resources going to. You want those resources, if we have to have defined benefit, just going into the highest returning asset class. And it's not hotels in Alabama, and it's certainly not golf courses, which are seldom a high yielding asset.
If you look at the Alabama system, the state recently was enacting a increase in the amount of insurance that employees who have retired would have to pay for insurance, and that has led to a wave of retirements.
Yep.
How would something like that affect the financial health of the RSA system?
Well, I think it's going to be negative. What you're referring to is a premium increase that affects any employee if they retire after a certain date. And what we saw was a whole wave of teachers, primarily, who retired. And they rushed to retirement even before, basically, they announced that they're retiring. And it'll be at the semester break where we have this flood of teachers who go on to the retirement system of Alabama. And then we have to fill all of those vacancies. And it's the result of just a sudden change in the promise. So the promise was broken, essentially. They were told, you'll have this health care when you retire, and now they're being told, actually, you're going to have to pay a whole bunch more for it. And it led to a lot of people saying, all right, forget it. I'm going to get out before I have to pay more. So when you have a program where the funding ratio is moving around a lot, you get all kinds of crazy policies in response to that. And some of them have really significant effects on human behavior. When you have a whole bunch of people saying, I'm retiring, I'm out now, and they're 55 or 56 or 57 years old, that's going to be a significant burden to us, those of us who are still working. So I think that the effect on the retirement funding ratio is negative. I think it's going to drive it down a little bit more, which means taxes may have to increase more, or benefits may have to be cut more in the future. So it's not surprising, but it will be negative.
And you mentioned the recent rash of unannounced or unanticipated retirements by teachers. What are some of the other types of inefficiencies or problems that defined benefit programs have? One is known as like the brain drain of early retirees.
That's right. So the drop program in some sense made sense, because what you were doing was you were trying to keep people here in the state. Now instead, when you get rid of that completely, retirees have this incentive to finish working for the state after 25 years, get fully vested, enjoy that nice benefit of 50% of highest 3-year salary. And if they're being told, well, you're not going to get that much more in the way of retirement, what they'll do is just exit. And we saw this before drop a lot. When you look at what people were doing, they were making all kinds of calculations about get vested and then leave the state. Because you can't continue working and get that same juicy benefit that you were getting after year 25. It doesn't continue, and doesn't continue to remain as attractive. So people move to Tennessee, people move to Florida. They get full-time jobs because they're still productive. They're still in their 50s, and then they're topping it off being technically retired in the state of Alabama. So that's one big effect. As someone who's been hiring people recently, it's really discouraging to have them come and be told and discover right away that 7.25% of your paycheck is going straight into this retirement system of Alabama. And I think that you could imagine them making calculations that, well, that money's being pooled for me if I don't become vested. So as long as I'm here less than 10 years, I could always pull that chunk of money out and go park it in defined contribution instead. After the 10-year point, it becomes vested, and I don't really have as many rights to it. So you can imagine people making calculations about how long should I stay in the state. And certainly, anecdotally, many people do this at Troy University and at state jobs around the state. They say, if I can just make it 10 years, then I'm going to take off. And it leads to just odd behavior. Whereas if you own your own account, you just make decisions about where do I want to live, what job is best for me, as opposed to I have to stay in the state.
Do you think there's any, do you think when we see contribution levels rise to 30% like you have in Louisiana, are we going to see then salaries for public workers, for teachers and professors go up just to offset this? Is this just going to be passed on to taxpayers, or what do you think is going to happen?
So I don't think that you can go that much higher with the public employees. At some point they'll say this is just ridiculous, a 10 or 12% tax, unless their salaries go up by a similar amount. So you see these really big salaries, but it's nominal in some sense. It's not real because you have to back out all of the taxes. I think it's really taxpayers and students who are affected most severely by these systems. Students, when you think about the fact that much of the retirement assets are coming from higher education and then K through 12 education as well. So we pay for it in terms of higher prices for college, and taxpayers pay for it in terms of higher taxes. Illinois is scary. I mentioned Illinois at the beginning. They have this really low funding ratio, and they're passing all kinds of temporary taxes through the year 2014 and 2015 to shore up their pension program. Well, what if it actually works a little bit, but doesn't get them all the way there? Then those taxes just become permanent. Taxes on millionaires, extra taxes on businesses, increases in employee contributions. So what is temporary becomes permanent real quickly, and that's kind of scary. We should probably wrap up, so I'll take the ball back from here. Thank you so much for grilling me today, and happy holidays to you too. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in tonight. Hopefully our discussion of the retirement system of Alabama wasn't too much of a bummer, but it is the reality when we look at the numbers. It's a system that, at minimum, needs reform, and the question just is what kind of reform, how much, and when should we do it? Good night.